When we talk about what truly makes a man unforgettable, what makes him leave an indelible mark on the lives of those who knew him, we inevitably return to this ancient truth. It is responsibility that grants a man weight. And I don't mean responsibility in the shallow, modern sense of simply paying the bills or showing up to work on time, though those are part of it. I mean the profound responsibility of becoming the kind of person who voluntarily shoulders the burdens of life, the suffering, the uncertainty, the chaos, so that others may find stability in your presence. That is the sort of responsibility that transforms a man into something more than himself, and it is precisely the kind of presence that a woman, in the deepest sense, cannot replace once it is gone. Now, you might think people miss those who are fun, entertaining, charming, or attractive. And yes, they do, but only for a time. Those things fade quickly. What endures, what carves itself into memory, is the reliability of someone who could be counted on, someone whose very existence made the unbearable a little more bearable. That kind of man becomes woven into the structure of someone else's life, and when he is absent, the absence is felt not just as longing, but as destabilization. His departure is like a pillar being removed from a house. The entire structure begins to tremble. And here's the paradox. Most men underestimate this. They imagine that being remembered requires constant effort to impress, or endless pursuit of attention, or displays of superficial power. But the truth is simpler and also much more difficult. It requires discipline, consistency, and sacrifice. To carry responsibility is to accept suffering voluntarily, to say, yes, life is heavy, but I will bear my share, and more if I must. That kind of stance creates a gravitational pull around you. People feel safer when you are near, not because you protect them from every harm, but because you have demonstrated that you will not collapse under pressure. Women particularly are attuned to this. Not because they are weak, but because in the deepest biological and psychological sense, they seek stability in a world that is, by its very nature, unstable. When a woman finds a man who willingly accepts the responsibility of ordering his own life, who does not shrink from duty, who does not excuse his failures by blaming others, she knows, even if she cannot articulate it, that such a man is rare. And if she loses him, she feels the weight of that loss in her bones. Responsibility is what gives a man depth. Without it, you remain shallow, like a leaf blowing in the wind, subject to the currents of every whim and desire. With it, you become rooted, like an oak tree, grounded and unshakable. And when an oak tree is cut down, its absence is not merely noted, it is mourned. People don't miss the weeds that are pulled from the garden, but they miss the tree that once cast shade, that once offered shelter, that once stood firm against the storm. That is the difference responsibility makes in a man's life. But let me add something crucial here. Responsibility is not glamorous. It does not flatter your ego in the moment. It doesn't always feel rewarding, and it certainly doesn't always make you happy. Happiness is fleeting, and it should not be the goal. What responsibility provides instead is meaning, and meaning outlasts happiness 100-fold. A man who takes on responsibility discovers that he is capable of carrying more than he imagined. And in the act of carrying, he grows stronger. And that strength, paradoxically, becomes the very reason others depend on him, trust him, and eventually, when he is absent, miss him. Think of it this way. If you refuse responsibility, if you avoid the weight, you may feel lighter temporarily. But in the long run, you become replaceable, forgettable. There's nothing unique about a man who avoids struggle, who drifts through life without anchoring himself to anything beyond his own pleasure. He is easily forgotten because he contributed nothing lasting. But the man who embraces responsibility leaves an imprint because he shapes not only himself, but also the lives around him. He becomes part of someone else's story, and stories, especially those infused with sacrifice and meaning, are not easily erased. So, when a woman misses a man deeply, painfully, it is rarely because he was the most handsome, the most exciting, or the most entertaining. She misses him because he bore the unbearable with grace. She misses him because his presence meant that the chaos of life was somehow less threatening. She misses him because he carried a weight that no one else was willing to carry, and once that weight is gone, its absence is overwhelming. That is what responsibility does. It makes you irreplaceable. And here is the challenge for you. Are you willing to accept that burden? Are you willing to say yes to the suffering that life demands, not because it is easy, not because it guarantees immediate reward, but because it is the only path to becoming unforgettable? If you want to live a life that matters, if you want to be the kind of man who is remembered, even mourned in your absence, then you must choose responsibility. It is not optional. It is the cost of depth, of meaning, of significance. At the end of the day, a man is not missed for his pleasures, his entertainments, or his fleeting displays of dominance. He is missed for his weight, for the load he bore, the order he created, and the stability he offered. That is what it means to be a man worth remembering. So take on the responsibility. Carry it willingly, because that, more than anything else, will ensure that when you are gone, your absence will be felt in the deepest possible way. If responsibility is the foundation that gives a man his weight, then integrity is the structure that allows that weight to stand tall without collapsing. You cannot carry responsibility for long if you lack integrity, because responsibility without truth eventually rots from the inside. Integrity is what gives responsibility its backbone, and without it, all the effort in the world crumbles into hypocrisy. That is why a man who possesses integrity is not only valuable but unforgettable. He cannot easily be replaced, because in a culture filled with deception, half-truths, and empty promises, a man who tells the truth and lives by it is a rarity. And rarity has value. People, particularly women, notice this almost unconsciously. They may not put it into words, but they feel it. A man who says one thing but does another erodes trust, and trust is the very fabric of any relationship. When trust dissolves, the relationship begins to unravel, thread by thread. But a man of integrity strengthens that fabric. He weaves every action and every word into alignment. Over time, this creates not just trust, but reverence. When such a man departs, he leaves behind a void that is not merely emotional, but moral. A woman doesn't just miss him for who he was. She misses the sense of certainty that his presence brought into her life. Now, let me be clear. Integrity is not simply about avoiding lies. That's the bare minimum. Integrity means ordering your entire being around truth, even when it costs you. It means refusing to manipulate, refusing to use words as weapons, refusing to compromise what you know to be right in order to gain short-term advantage. And that is no small task. It demands courage, because truth is often painful. Truth exposes weakness, it invites criticism, and it demands sacrifice. But paradoxically, those sacrifices are what build strength. Every time you act with integrity, you reinforce your own spine, and over time, you become unshakable. Think of it this way. A man without integrity is like a beautiful house built on sand. From a distance, it looks solid, perhaps even impressive. But the first storm exposes its weakness, and it collapses into ruins. A man with integrity, by contrast, may not look as flashy, but he is like a house built on stone. The storms come, as they inevitably do, and yet he remains standing. And when someone has lived alongside such strength, when they have leaned on it and trusted it, and then suddenly it is gone, they feel that absence like an earthquake. That's why integrity makes you unforgettable. It's also worth pointing out that integrity is attractive not because it's convenient, but because it's rare. In a world that constantly rewards manipulation, where lying might help you climb the ladder faster, where saying what people want to hear might make you popular, where compromising values can earn you temporary gains, it is tempting to abandon truth. Most people do, at least in small ways. And that is why someone who refuses, who stands by his principles even when it hurts, commands respect. People may not always like him, but they cannot ignore him. And when he is gone, they realize that his absence has left a hole that lesser men cannot fill. And here is the irony. Integrity often costs you in the short term. It can lead to rejection, to conflict, even to isolation. But in the long term, it creates a reputation that outlives you. People might not agree with everything you said or did, but they will remember that you were honest, that you were reliable, that you did not bend in the wind. And that memory is powerful because it stands in stark contrast to the countless men who betrayed trust for the sake of convenience. Women, especially, will feel the loss of such a man deeply, because integrity, more than charm or charisma, creates a bond of safety. A woman may enjoy the attention of a charming man, but she will not truly rely on him if he lacks integrity. She knows, even if unconsciously, that such a man can be bought, swayed, or tempted. But the man of integrity cannot. His loyalty is not for sale. His word is not negotiable. And so, when he is gone, it is not merely affection that is missed, it is the profound sense of trust and security that only integrity can provide. This is why men who live with integrity often become legends in memory. Their presence might have been taken for granted while they lived, but in their absence, their value shines more clearly. People remember the man who kept his promises, who spoke the truth even when it stung, who stood firm when it would have been easier to give in. That man becomes the standard against which others are measured. And almost inevitably, others fall short. So ask yourself, do you want to be the kind of man who is easily forgotten because you blended in with the crowd of deceivers and compromises? Or do you want to be the man whose absence is felt precisely because your presence was so rare? The answer is obvious, but the path is difficult. It requires a daily commitment to truth, to action aligned with words, to a life that reflects coherence rather than contradiction. That is integrity, and it is the source of real strength. When all is said and done, a man is not remembered for how clever he was at bending the truth, or how skilled he was at pretending. He is remembered for his honesty, his consistency, his alignment with something higher than himself. Integrity is not just a virtue. It is the foundation of trust, and trust is the bedrock of love, respect, and memory. That is why, when a man of integrity is gone, he is missed not casually, but profoundly. So choose integrity. Choose it even when it costs you.
Choose it even when it isolates you.
Because in the end, it is not the easy path that makes you unforgettable, but the hard one. Integrity is the path of the strong, and strength is always remembered. If responsibility gives a man weight, and integrity gives him a spine, then emotional stability is what makes that weight bearable and that spine reliable. Because you can have responsibility, and you can have integrity, but if you cannot control your emotions, if you are constantly tossed around by anger, fear, or despair, you will eventually undermine the very things you are trying to build. Emotional stability is what allows a man to endure, to stand in the storm without becoming the storm himself. And it is precisely this quality that, when absent, leaves a woman feeling unmoored, as though the ground beneath her has vanished. Life is turbulent. Everyone knows it. Chaos lurks in every corner, at work, in relationships, in the unexpected tragedies that break through ordinary days. And in the midst of that chaos, people long for something solid. They long for someone whose presence does not add more instability, but instead steadies the entire environment. When a man embodies that steadiness, when his emotions are under control rather than controlling him, he becomes more than just a partner, more than just a friend. He becomes a fortress. And when such a fortress is gone, the absence is profound. It is not only felt emotionally, it is felt existentially, because the very sense of safety in the world has been diminished. Now, emotional restraint is often misunderstood. People think it means suppression or coldness, or a refusal to feel. That is not true. Emotional stability is not the absence of feeling, it is the mastery of feeling. It is the ability to experience anger without letting it turn to cruelty, to experience fear without letting it paralyze you, to experience grief without letting it shatter you. It means you can feel deeply, but you are not enslaved by those feelings. And that is rare. That is why it is remembered. Think about the man who loses his temper at the slightest inconvenience, who lashes out at those closest to him, who becomes unpredictable and volatile. Such a man might appear strong in his anger, but he is actually weak because he has no control. He is a puppet to his own impulses. And while he may inspire fear in the moment, he does not inspire respect. And when he is gone, he is not missed, he is often a relief. Contrast that with the man who, in the face of provocation, can breathe, think, and respond rather than react. That man commands not only respect but admiration, because he demonstrates that strength is not about overpowering others, but about mastering oneself. A woman, living alongside such a man, senses this stability intuitively. She knows she can bring her struggles, her fears, even her storms to him, and he will not collapse. He will not amplify the chaos, he will contain it. That does not mean he solves every problem, but his presence itself is a solution because it communicates, "I will not be shaken. You can rely on me." And when that is taken away, the absence is felt as a deep longing for security that cannot easily be replaced. This is why emotional stability is so closely tied to responsibility and integrity. If you lack stability, your responsibility becomes inconsistent. You carry the load one day and drop it the next, depending on your mood. Without stability, your integrity wavers. You promise truth but lash out in falsehood when emotions flare. Stability is the bridge between principle and practice. It ensures that what you say and what you do align consistently over time, regardless of the emotional weather of the day. And make no mistake, stability is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is not an excuse for cowardice. On the contrary, it is the highest form of strength because it requires mastery of the most difficult opponent you will ever face, yourself. It is far easier to fight others than to discipline your own emotions. It is far easier to give into rage or despair than to stand calmly in the storm. And yet, it is precisely this discipline that sets a man apart. People remember the calm in the chaos. They remember the presence that steadied them when they were falling apart. They remember the one who did not escalate conflict, but de-escalated it. And women, especially, remember men who brought stability rather than volatility. Because life is already unpredictable, no one wants to build their foundation on quicksand. If you are stable, you become the ground beneath someone's feet. If you are unstable, you become another source of chaos to flee from. And here's the truth. Stability does not mean you will never falter. It means that when you do falter, you recover quickly. It means you do not stay down. It means you can absorb the blows of life without breaking apart. Over time, this creates a presence that others cannot help but rely on, even if they take it for granted while you're there. But when you are gone, the absence is devastating because stability is not something easily replaced. Volatility is everywhere. Composure is rare. So, what should you take from this? If you want to be unforgettable, if you want to be the man whose absence is deeply missed, you must cultivate emotional stability. You must discipline yourself to feel without losing control, to speak without venom, to stand without collapsing. This is not only for others, it is for yourself. Because stability is the only way to carry responsibility and maintain integrity without breaking under the strain. At the end of the day, people do not long for the ones who brought chaos into their lives. They long for the ones who made the chaos bearable. A woman will not miss the man who raged uncontrollably, who broke trust in fits of emotion, who collapsed under pressure. She will miss the man who stood firm, who steadied her, who embodied strength not as dominance, but as composure. That is the man whose absence is felt and whose presence is cherished. So learn to master yourself. Learn to breathe in the storm. Learn to carry not only the weight of life, but also the weight of your emotions with dignity and discipline. Because it is that stability, more than passion, more than charm, that makes you unforgettable.
Stability is strength.
And strength, when remembered, is always missed. There comes a point where responsibility, integrity, and stability converge into a final test. And that test is this. Do you know when to walk away? Do you know when holding on is no longer strength but weakness, when staying has ceased to be an act of loyalty and has become an act of self-betrayal? Because here's the truth. A man who clings desperately to what diminishes him loses the very qualities that made him valuable in the first place. He forfeits his dignity. And dignity, once abandoned, is extraordinarily difficult to recover. It is easy to stay in situations where you are not respected, to beg for approval, to tolerate neglect or even contempt. It is easy because fear whispers, if you leave, you will have nothing. Fear convinces you that the scraps of recognition you are given are better than no recognition at all. But that is not true. The cost of living without dignity is far greater than the cost of walking away with it intact. Because once you sacrifice dignity, you begin to unravel from within. You lose self-respect, and without self-respect, responsibility collapses, integrity shatters, stability falters. Everything else we've spoken about rests upon this final pillar, the courage to walk away. Women, whether consciously or unconsciously, know this. They can sense when a man clings beyond what is reasonable, when his fear of loss outweighs his sense of self. And paradoxically, the more desperately he holds on, the less she respects him. Desperation signals weakness. It reveals dependency, not strength. And though it might temporarily preserve proximity, it erodes admiration. The man who cannot walk away has traded dignity for attachment, and in doing so, he has become forgettable. But the man who knows his worth, who refuses to compromise it, who can step back with steadiness even from what he loves, that man becomes unforgettable. Because dignity leaves an imprint far deeper than desperation ever could. Now, let me be clear. Walking away does not mean abandoning responsibility. It does not mean fleeing when things get difficult, or giving up at the first sign of struggle. Quite the opposite. Responsibility means enduring hardship, maintaining integrity, and showing stability even when it hurts. But there are limits where continuing would mean sacrificing the very principles that define you. Walking away with dignity means recognizing those limits and refusing to cross them, no matter how strong the pull of desire, no matter how powerful the fear of loss. Think about this. When you walk away with dignity, you communicate something profound, not just to others, but to yourself. You declare, my value is not dependent on your recognition. My worth is not determined by your approval. I belong to something higher than your temporary acceptance. That is a terrifying stance to take, but it is also liberating. It frees you from the prison of needing constant validation. And it makes your presence more powerful because people know you are not enslaved by their whims. And here's the paradox again. The willingness to walk away does not lessen love or loyalty. It purifies it. Because love without dignity is dependency. But love with dignity is choice. When you remain in someone's life not because you need them to prop up your sense of worth, but because you choose to share your worth with them, that is powerful. And when you can leave, if necessary, with dignity intact, that choice gains even greater weight. It means you stayed out of strength, not out of weakness. And that distinction is what makes you unforgettable. A woman will not miss the man who clung to her out of desperation because his presence felt like a burden. But she will miss deeply the man who stayed by her side with strength and who, when unvalued, had the courage to step away. His absence will haunt her because it confronts her with the reality that such strength is rare and that she has lost it. That kind of absence grows heavier with time, not lighter. It lingers because dignity casts a long shadow. And you, as a man, must understand this. Your life is too precious to be spent begging for recognition where there is none. Your responsibility, your integrity, your stability, they are not bargaining chips to be squandered in the hope that someone will finally notice. They are treasures, and they must be guarded. To walk away with dignity is to protect them. It is to say, I will not sell my soul for temporary closeness. I will not compromise my essence to avoid loneliness. I will bear the loneliness if I must, because the alternative is far worse. And that, ultimately, is what makes a man unforgettable. Not his desperation, not his ability to hold on at any cost, but his courage to let go when letting go is the only way to remain whole. The memory of such a man endures, because his absence speaks not of weakness, but of strength, strength so rare that its loss cannot easily be consoled. So here is the final call. Do not be afraid to walk away when dignity demands it. Do not shrink from the loneliness that follows. Loneliness is painful, yes, but it is infinitely better than the erosion of your soul. And in time, That loneliness becomes strength because it confirms that you are not dependent on anyone else to affirm your worth. That is how a man becomes irreplaceable. That is how his absence becomes unforgettable. At the end of it all, people remember not the ones who clung, but the ones who stood tall, who refused to bend when bending meant breaking themselves. They remember the ones who walked away with their dignity intact, leaving behind not desperation but respect. And respect endures. So carry yourself with dignity. Protect it as you would your life. Because once it is gone, all else collapses. But if it remains, then even in your absence, you will be remembered and missed, not lightly, but profoundly.